For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dlamini. A well-renowned columnist and author, Fred Khumalo, discusses his book titled Dancing the Death Thrill. Today marks 100 years commemoration since the SS Mendi tragedy, where more than 600 South African men died on their way to France to assist their allies in World War I. Can you briefly unpack what the book entails?
Yeah, the book is not just a retelling of the actual sinking of the Mendi. Yes, that part is there. But what I seek to do in the book is to tell the story of these men. Why would they go and fight in a war that was clearly not theirs? And who are these men? Where do they come from? So that's my premise, to look at their history, look at their motivation, and of course recount or reenact or reimagine how the vessel went down and what happened as the ship was going down.
How did you first learn about the SS Mendi tragedy, and why is it important for all South Africans to be aware of this tragedy?
Yeah, in higher primary school back in the 70s, I was part of the school choir, and we sang this song, it's Xhosa song, Amagocha eMendi. It was a tribute to these people who went down with the Mendi. But obviously, as a child of 12 years, 13 years, it didn't really sink into my consciousness as to what that actually meant. Who were these people and so on. So the song was forgotten to me until I went to France as a journalist in 2003 or 2. I was covering a totally unrelated matter. And during my stay over there, the guy who was driving us around, our guide, started showing us the sights in Paris. And then it decided, no, let's move out of Paris. And we got on the train all the way to the west coast of France. And we got there, and he had a surprise for us because he had planned this thing properly. And he took us to this war cemetery. That's where we saw all these names. And I immediately recognized some names, because I mean, a Vundla being buried in France, a Mutsueneng in France, you know, all these names are South Africans. And he says this is where some of the survivors of the Mendi are buried. Some of them came back home, others died while they were there, because the war took a long time. It took from 1914 to 1918. Some people died of natural causes. They are not used to the freezing cold in France and so on. They died there, they're buried there. So we saw these war graves, and this spark that had been lit back then as a child started being rekindled. It was rekindled, and I thought, I'm going to write something. So I wrote 2 stories for the newspaper that I was working for. But I felt, no, this deserved a bigger treatment. And then I thought about the book. Of course, it took me a long time to think as to how exactly to approach this book. Do I write a non-fictional account? But now, if I wanted to do that, where would I go for sourcing? Because I didn't know if even those who came back after the war in 1918, in 2003, 2004, they would have been dead, or they would be in their hundreds. They wouldn't remember anything. So I started going to the newspaper archives, and there was information there. But back then, newspapers of 1917, that's how deep I went into the story. I read the newspapers from back then at the library, and started recreating this thing in my mind. And I thought, okay, you know what? I'm also a novelist, so let me use my technique as an artist, as a novelist, to reimagine this story. In fact, writing this as a novel gave me the liberty to put my own aromat and salt, you know, into the whole narrative, and create characters that would suit my goal as a writer in telling this story, the motivation as to why these guys went over there.
There is a book on the same subject. What makes yours unique?
Mine is a combination of the figures. Okay, the book called Black Valor by Norman Clothier is a very straightforward recollection of what happened to these men. It gives us figures, it gives us dates, and it gives us names of people who were there on the boat, both who survived and those who died. There's a list of names. But what the book doesn't do, it lacks the human touch. That's where I come in. I humanize these figures because history is full of figures, it's full of dates, it's full of data and so on. But it doesn't give us the soul, the spirit of the people. Why were they there? Who are these people? Because you can imagine 900 men on a ship from different parts of the country. They are different characters, different cultures, different languages. Obviously, there will be friendships, there will be fights. There were fights on the ship as they were traveling over there, because there were guys saying, "Impatas are Natali," you know that kind of thing. Regionalism, tribalism. It was there. It's a fact. So I bring that to life in this book. That is the differentiating factor between my book and the book that has been published before.
The book also reveals that the men were promised money for taking part in the war. Do you know if the families of the men who died, as well as those who were in the war, were compensated?
No. These guys were earning a salary. They were being paid £3 a month, which was a lot of money at the time. But after the war, they came back, those who survived, they came back. But we also must remember, the Mendi people were not the first or the last to go over there. Altogether, there were 21,000 black men who went over there. They started leaving the country in 1916 until 1918, when the war ended. Now, the guys on the Mendi left the country on the 17th of January, 1917, from Cape Town. They arrived in England on the 20th of February. So it's the whole month. The Mendi guys were the 5th battalion, in other words, the 5th ship to leave South Africa. They served until the war ended. And then when they came back, this is the tragedy, and a second tragedy. They were not recognized. Their contribution was not recognized. The white guys who fought alongside these black people got medals, they got financial compensation, some of them were given land as well. But our guys were not given anything because the local government, the Union of South Africa, this is long before the Boers, this is long before the apartheid regime. This is 1917, we were still part of the British Empire. The local government thought by giving these guys recognition, they would be setting a bad precedent, putting these black people on the same par as white people. So they were denied recognition. The irony, though, is some of the guys who served alongside the Mendi people came from Basotho land, which is now Lesotho. Others came from Botswana land, which is now Botswana. Those people from Botswana and Lesotho did get medals, not our guys.
Do you think that our government is doing enough to celebrate the brave men who sank in the SS Mendi tragedy, as well as those who took part in the war?
It's only a start. It's good that the highest order for bravery in this country is called the Mendi, the Order of the Mendi. That is commendable. That is wonderful. And it's also good that the president in 2012 decided to declare the 21st of February the Armed Forces Day. That is very, very good, to remember the contribution not only of the Mendi people or the native, but also the other people who fought in other wars overseas and on the continent, to give recognition. But this is, in my opinion, this is a very first step, a very significant step towards recognition. What we do need, is to tell these stories at our schools through books being prescribed at schools, so that people, our children, our grandchildren, should know what happened. That has been lacking, because I finished matric without knowing, without ever reading this story in a history book. It's not there. It has never been there. So this is my humble contribution to start a dialogue to say, let's talk about this.
Some people didn't like the idea of South Africans, especially black South Africans, being part of the war. Can you explain how South Africa became part of World War I?
Yeah, you have to recall that Union of South Africa was part of the British Empire. So we were subjects of King George V. So when the war was in stalemate by 1916, 2 years later, no one was winning the war. They killed each other like hell, those people in Europe. But they needed to inject more blood. And someone said, you know what, we have another colony, South Africa. Why don't we recruit people from South Africa? So they started recruiting. They recruited white people first, but white people were in the minority. They went over there. It didn't change the course of the war. And somebody said, what about black people? Now, there was a huge debate in Parliament about that. Some white people in Parliament thought, no, we can't allow black people to go and witness this carnage, white people killing each other. What image are we setting? What precedent are we setting? We send these people over there, they'll come back and they'll be spoiled, and they will challenge us as white people in South Africa. So that matter was debated. And then somebody said, okay, let's meet halfway here. Let's reach a compromise. And the compromise was, let's take these guys over there, but we are not going to give them arms. We're not going to give them guns. So they went over there. They were never given guns. So they went over there to serve as cooks, to drive a machine, to push machinery from the ship all the way to the Western Front, where the war was being prosecuted, to also chop wood. Remember, technology was very primitive at that time, so they needed to do things manually. So these black people were doing that. And they were attacked many times on the Western Front. They couldn't defend themselves because they were not armed. Some of them died in some of the attacks, as I recount in the book. Yeah. So that was the other tragedy. You go into war, you are not armed.
The men who survived the SS Mendi tragedy were disappointed with the outcome of the inquest. Captain Stamp, who was in charge of the SS Daro that caused the tragic accident and who failed to help the drowning men, had his license suspended for only 1 year. Why do you think he got off so lightly?
Yeah, it's difficult to speculate, because he did really get off very lightly. His license was suspended for only 1 year, and that was it. Having read through the transcript of the whole inquest, it's really disappointing. Of course, as a black person in South Africa, I do suspect there was an element of racism in this, because he admits in the inquest that, yes, I heard voices crying out in the dark, but I didn't have enough manpower to rescue these people, which is not true. Really. So stories have been told as to, well, the speculation is, had these people drowning there been white, it would have changed his response. So yeah, there is that niggling suspicion on my part and on the part of the people who reported at that time, newspapers who reported about this incident at that time.
There are famous, powerful words that were said by Reverend Dyobha when the ship was sinking. Tell us more about this brave moment from the fallen soldiers, and tell us about their famed dance of the death drill.
Yes, it's a very powerful and evocative moment in the whole story of the Mendi. People remember it because it's so courageous, it's so brave, what happened. As the ship was listing and sinking, Obviously, there's chaos. People were jumping overboard. Some of them couldn't swim. They were screaming. Others were trapped in the decks below. They couldn't rise up because the ship had 3 levels. So those at the bottom couldn't. They died there inside the ship. They are below decks. But on deck, there were some guys under the leadership of the Reverend Isaac Dyobha. Isaac Dyobha was a chaplain on the ship. So he was their spiritual guide and a very powerful person from the Eastern Cape. So it is said that as the ship was listing, he asked them to stand in formation as if they were going to drill. And then he started saying, and I'm going to quote the words that actually inform the title of my book. My book is Dancing the Death Thrill, where I'm going to read about this death thrill. What is it? So as the ship is going down, Isaac Dyobha stands up and in front of these men, and he says, "Be quiet and come, my countrymen. What is taking place now is exactly what you came to do. You are going to die, but that is what you came to do. Brothers, we are drilling the drill of death. I, Xhosa, say you are all my brothers. Zulus, Swazis, Pondos, Basutus, we die like brothers. We are the sons of Africa. Raise your cries, brothers. For though they made us leave our weapons at home, our voices are left with our bodies. We die like brothers." So those were the courageous words that have been immortalized. So whenever you go around the country, there are some monuments which were built by some of the survivors in memory of this moment. So if you go and see those monuments, you will see these words. They are inscribed in all these on all these stones. There's one in PE, there's one here in Braamfontein, another one in Dundee. They all repeat the same words. So it's a story that's been passed from generation to generation orally. It's a powerful, evocative moment about the sinking of the ship.
Leader of the Black First Land First, Andile Mqitama, said that these men shouldn't be celebrated. What is your take on that statement?
Yeah, I've seen that. It's unfortunate that some people are very myopic and sometimes they speak out of turn without really applying their minds. It is tragic to dismiss the contribution, the role that was played by these men. Because we must remember, some people enlisted to go and fight in Europe because of many conditions. The Land Act had been passed in 1913, which dispossessed black people of their land in huge numbers. And the ANC of the time, it was still called the South African National Congress, and the churchmen and traditional leaders were of the opinion, an honest, maybe naive opinion, that if we throw in our lot with the British Empire, if we support the war effort, maybe the British Empire might give us a hearing, an audience, so that we can address all these concerns, the Native Land Act, and many other things that affected us as black people. So this was another way of prosecuting our struggle. Our struggle didn't start yesterday. It goes back a long time ago. So this should be recognized as a chapter in our struggle. Of course, it was not an armed struggle, but it was tactical. These people were full of hope. They were very optimistic. So it's very unfortunate that Mr. Mqitama is very myopic and dismissive of such a very important chapter in our struggle. The struggle didn't start with him. He was born yesterday.
That was author and columnist Fred Khumalo speaking to Crema Media's Polity about his book titled Dancing the Death Thrill.